Welcome to Messy Christian Mamas. We are three Christian moms with a progressive mindset and loving hearts and minds. We are imperfect humans, but we're all loved in God's sight. At some point, we've all felt like the church and Christianity may not have been for us, but God isn't looking for perfection. He's just looking for you. We are not experts in Christian theology, and we do not represent any particular Christian faith or church. We are simply here to be authentic, and we hope you join us on this journey.
Hi friends! Today we discuss the notion of church shopping with our friend Carol, including which aspects of a church are personally important to us, as well as what does the Bible say a church should look like. Enjoy!
Hello, welcome back to Messy Christian Mamas. Today's episode, we are talking about shopping for a church. So this is a topic that I think a lot of you may have dealt with. All of us have at some point in time looked for a church that reflects the things that we believe in and had to really embark on that journey. I'm Kendra.
I'm Ashley.
Kaylee. And we have a special guest with us today, Carol Axford. So Carol, why don't you say hello for us?
Hello.
So Carol recently went through this process of church shopping and arrived at the church that all of us now attend together, and thought that she would be a really good person to talk to about her recent journey in coming to the church that we are all at. So how did each of us find our way to our current church? Who wants to start?
Well, it's the current, Carol's the most current. So
Yeah. Carol, why don't you start?
I had attended a particular church denomination for my whole life, and I'm actually a fifth generation attendee of that church, but it came to light this year that my beliefs were not in tandem with the beliefs of the church. So my husband and I had to start the journey of finding a new church home, and it was painful to leave our church family that we loved and have been with forever. But we started visiting churches. We visited 10 different churches in our neighborhood or location. My husband said, "When are we going to quit shopping? This is miserable to be the new person every Sunday." But for a long time, I have wondered what was going on in other neighboring churches. Some of my young friends had left ours and gone elsewhere, and I thought, what are they doing over there? How do they worship? How do they minister? What are they doing to attract people? And so I just had the luxury of visiting different ones and finding out how people do church, really. And what we learned was we could be really happy worshiping a lot of different ways, and we loved hearing different ministers, pastors, sermons, and music. The variety of music was just really a lot of fun to experience those different ways, and it brought home to us, God is big, and He can just speak to us in a lot of different ways. He speaks to different people in different ways. So anyway, that was fun for me, not so much for my husband, but we did that. But what we realized was what we could not exactly find a duplicate of from our old church was a small group. And we had been in a small group for a long time and built close bonds and friendships. So finding that new small group that was not quite as simple. And there were other groups that met that had a history we were not a part of. And it's not even realistic to expect that we would be a part of people that have been together for a long time.
Small groups can be that way, can't they? They can be very long-standing groups
and
of
so
people.
We found that the people at our new church maybe been there 20, 30 years. They have strong bonds, and we were a little bit outside of that circle. But what really attracted us, number one, the pastor was very attentive to us. He came right up to us the first Sunday we were there, noticed that we were new, engaged us, offered to have coffee with us, which we took him up on that offer. We enjoyed the music, And people, not just the staff, but the laity, were very, very friendly. And we decided that most people looking for a new church are looking for those three things. Pastor with a message that connects, music that they like, and people being friendly. I'm not so sure that the theology is at the top of that list. Maybe it is for some people.
Yeah.
And certainly for us, after our experience in our former church, we paid more attention to that.
Sure.
But those were the three things that pulled us to our new church.
But you left off the part that you and George started a small group at Christ Our Shepherd.
We
It's
did.
a huge blessing. And brought all these people together who were new members and even old members too. And just, it's been so wonderful.
Well, it was a blessing for us that some of our friends from our former church came, but we told the pastor we do not want to be a clique
Yeah.
from our former church. We were very intentional about that. What can we do to integrate and marry ourselves with our new church and not just be another, small group that doesn't.
You've done such a wonderful job of that. I'm the odd man out here that really hasn't been a part of your small group yet, and not because I don't want to be. I get busy with stuff in
You're a
both
busy
services
lady.
a lot. But
All that
yeah,
singing.
that, and then with Brad being in tech, he's always pulling me in different directions to do other things. But anyway, I think that it's wonderful to see how well you have pulled people together out of that contemporary service. I would say really specifically, there hasn't been a lot of small groups that have, appealed or just done a great job of pulling that group of people together in a room to talk deeper, to double click on things.
Well, it was clear to us that was a void.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like when you're sales, you look for a product that people want and nobody has, and you manufacture that product. Mm-hmm. And so we realized that there was no small group that met on Sunday morning at a time frame that worked for the contemporary worshipers.
Yeah.
So we thought, let's go there.
Yeah, especially like at our church where there is so much that the church does. Like they have so many, like they've got their fingers in so many pies, and there are so many different ministries that the church does. I think so. It's very easy to come in and just join, but to lead and to create, it can be like to see everything that was, especially when you did the new member class, and our lovely connections minister goes through the laundry list of ministries that you can be a part of. Yeah. So it's very easy to just come in and be like, oh, okay, I'll just meld with one of these groups, which you did do. I mean, you did do as well. But to then come in and say like, no, I want to create something new that I see a need, and that was a blind spot for a lot of people. I don't think a lot of people realized how much there was a need until it was actually created. And then you've had a really great. We were talking about the numbers the other day. It's summer, and people are still still there. So
I love like the age range in that group and how it's multi-generational. Like I'm in there with my mom, and Marla's there with her father Ken, and just it's great.
Yeah. We go. So the age would go on the lower end would be what?
That'd be Kaylee. Well, Ethan.
I'm about to say Ethan's in there sometimes. Ethan's 28.
Okay, so we go from 28 to 88. How
Yeah.
fun is
Wow.
that?
That's
amazing.
amazing.
That really brings a wealth of
Is Ken the oldest?
Huh?
Is Ken the oldest? Is Ken the oldest?
I think so.
I think
And
so.
it might be our new person, Marty. She's right in there with
that's
him
right.
in the 88 realm.
Okay.
So two of them, but two so engaged people.
Yes.
He's
And-
wonderful. I don't know her, but
Yeah.
I know.
It's what I learned what agape meant was because of Ken.
Yeah.
Yeah, but Kaylee, for you to crochet an agape-shaped heart and give it to Ken,
He was so happy. It just made my heart so happy to
Wow.
see how happy what
and
he
I
was.
visited when they moved into their new home. It is front and center on his bed.
Aww, that makes me so happy. He's so
Yeah.
sweet.
Yeah.
He's such an interesting character. We have talked about trying to figure out a podcast to have him on. Maybe just do one on agape and just have Ken do the whole podcast and we just listen to him.
That
I
would
love
be
listening
so
to
That's a
him
cool.
great
talk.
idea.
He's so sweet.
Well, because one of the really, really encouraging things, and to feel honored that you want my opinion, that you want his opinion, and conversely, I want your opinion. They're topics that I'm like, wait, I've heard this in the younger generation. Is it happening? Is that true?
Yeah.
What? Talk to me. Tell me, what's going on. So I love the opportunity to just meld our minds.
That's wonderful. How long were you at your last church?
25 years.
That is a long time. So much history, so many relationships there. I'm sure that was probably very difficult.
Gut-wrenching would be the word.
Yeah.
Now, do you still have connections?
Absolutely.
I'm about to say, because just because you leave doesn't mean you have to render
I
connections.
had a luncheon last month and I had 20 of my friends.
Aw, that's so
Oh.
nice.
I mean, I love to have people in my home, but that was just, I want them to know I'm still loving you.
Mm-hmm.
And then conversely, they're still loving me, and that's the goal, I think, in the kingdom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It should be anyway. So.
Oh, agreed. Agreed.
Yeah.
Well, Kaylee, you have an interesting story about.
So I think I'm
well.
the next newest one
Okay.
to our current church. So I had shopped a couple of times. We were attending a church in Sharpsburg when Charlie was a baby, and I had a very good friend of mine pass away, and that church just because I had met her there and we had so many memories there, it was just too painful to keep going. Plus, it was in Sharpsburg, which is a very long drive from where I live in North Fayetteville. And so we started attending another church in Peachtree City that has a really great children's program, like a fantastic children and youth program. And we were going there for about 6 years. And I was leading small groups there. I was doing student ministry there. And I had a personal kind of struggle with some of the doctrine that was not necessarily being preached, but was being kind of enforced. And it kind of came to a head, and I was just like, it's where your comfort, you're so comfortable in a certain place, and then it gets to a point where you're like, I can't even feel comfortable here anymore, even though I have so many friends here, my child's so happy here, something's not sitting right. So Charlie, as these ladies know, goes to like 7 or 8 VBSs every summer because they're free, and I'm a single mom, and I can't. So she's a very well-rounded Christian every summer, and our church was one of the VBSs that she goes to because we do a night VBS, which as a single mom was such a great opportunity to just get rid of her for a couple of hours a night. So, and they had invited her to sing, and I was raised by a Catholic father and an Anglican mother. So I was raised in very traditional type of religious household. I went to Methodist church growing up, so I was very used to like tradition ways. But then I'm also super liberal and very progressive, and it's very hard to marry those two together. You don't find a lot of spaces where you have a lot of tradition, and it be progressive at the same time. When we came to our church, we were at the traditional service, so it's organ music and hymns, and it's communion, and it's beautiful. And I was sitting there and I was like, I really miss all of this, but I don't know. And then I had gotten a bulletin they were looking for volunteers to march in the Pride Parade, and I was like, oh, what? We can do both? This is fantastic. I remember driving home very quickly, and running outside to my dad and just being like, Dad, oh my God, like, do you know about the ELCA? And I never heard of it before. Like, being Lutheran is not a very popular church in this particular area of the country that we live in. So I didn't know a lot about it, other than Martin Luther nailing the list on the door against the Catholics, which I went to my Catholic father to ask him about. So maybe that wasn't the best plan on the planet. And my dad was like, no, I'm not surprised that you feel comfortable here. This is what they stand for. This is what they believe in. And we started going. I did finish, I was doing student ministry at this other church. So for a year, we were going to both. So luckily I had befriended these ladies. So I would drive to COS first thing in the morning, drop Charlie off with them so that she could do Sunday school, and then go to the other church, do student ministry with my 8th graders at that church, and then drive back to our church again and to go to 11 o'clock service so that I could go to service at our church. And I did it for an entire year until the 8th graders graduated, and then it was like, okay, bye guys. I'm tired, I can only do one. But yeah, so to me, it was very much the same thing. I wanted a community. I wanted the church that I was going to was huge. It was massive. And it was an Andy Stanley satellite church, which I don't mind saying because I've mentioned it before. Andy Stanley is an amazing pastor. I listen to his sermons every week. But it being a satellite church, it's being broadcasted in. So Andy Stanley doesn't know me. And I wanted to have that personal relationship with my pastor like I had when I was growing up. And I wanted my daughter to know who her pastors were, who her youth director was, I wanted her to have a personal relationship. And I wanted her to be raised in a community that was not only going to lift her up on her happy days, but it was also going to support her on her low ends. I think it's really easy as a church to kind of get there, during times of grief and in times of joy, but it's in a lot of churches, they're not there for the everyday shuffle of things, where I wanted us to be able to walk into a building and everyone know who we were, and I knew who everyone was. And if we were missing one week, it would be noticed, and I would get phone calls and say, hey, where are you? Or if I have Charlotte with me, hey, is Charlie feeling okay? Where is she? We miss her. And that's what we found at COS, was this sense of community. We go into traditional service. They very quickly enveloped us and just surrounded us with love and have been very supported. And the youth program and children's program is fantastic. And they don't tokenize my daughter, which I very much appreciate, because there have been other churches that we've attended, because she's a biracial child, they kind of tokenize her and use her as like their diversity quotient, and it's not fun for a mom to see. Yeah. And that doesn't happen because we do have a diverse church. And so it's been really nice to have a sense of community where I still have my relationships from this other church, and I still reach out to them. I still have relationships with these students that I did small group ministry with. But it's very nice knowing that if I'm not feeling great, I'm not having to put on airs when I go on a Sunday morning. Like, I can walk into our church on a Sunday morning. If I'm not feeling great, I can turn around and say, I don't feel great. And there's at least 10 people there that are going to be like, what do you need? What do you need from us? Do you want Charlotte to come home with us? Do you need a cookie? Do you need some coffee? And it's just nice knowing that there's a safety net that's constantly reaching out.
Authenticity is a real luxury, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. It's so nice, especially in this area where it is very much about appearance and keeping up with the Joneses. And I can't afford to do that. I'm a full-time working single mom. I can't afford to keep up with the Peachtree City Joneses. They're way out of my tax bracket. There's no way I'm going to keep up with them. So it's so nice being able to go to a place where there is such a diversity in age and gender and tax bracket and everything, but everyone is treated equally. Like, everyone is treated with the same love and warmth and welcoming. And I've never seen anyone put on airs. I've never seen anyone be like saccharine. Like, I've never seen someone being like overly sweet or overly welcoming or overly like, come join us because, you think that they have deep pockets or they're hitting a quota that you need for your type of church. And it's something that I've seen a lot. And it sucks because I was like, well, you're not getting a lot of treasure from me. You get time and talent, but that's about it. But I've never been made to feel that because I'm not hitting the offering hard every Sunday, that my presence isn't wanted or not valued as much as someone who does have deeper pockets than I do. And that is a rare thing now in a lot of these modern churches is who's lining the coffers, who's paying for these pretty, modern churches with coffee bars and and all of that stuff. So it's hard. But yeah, that's me. Who would be next? You would be next.
I think I'd be next. So let's see. This was where would I want to start?
Name.
Kendra. Yes, so I'm Kendra. Hello. So my husband and I was raised in the evangelical church. So I was raised in a charismatic church, dancing the aisles, people speaking in tongues, the whole nine. And my husband was raised in the Methodist church. So Kaylee, similar to you, very traditional, very liturgical. His mom was a music minister. She led choirs and was a high school music teacher for most of her education career. And his dad was always in the choir, very involved in the churches too. Both of his grandfathers were Methodist pastors. His dad, for a short time, was one as well. So we actually wound up getting married in the Methodist church and became members of the Methodist church. We were section leaders in our choir in college for the Methodist church, and really loved our experience there. As we, graduated college and got into our careers, we just stopped going to church. We got busy, as many 20-somethings do, and fell away from it. And moved all around the country. We were in New York and didn't go to church. We moved to San Francisco and didn't go to church. We moved to LA and didn't go to church. Then we moved to Atlanta. And after we'd been in Atlanta for a bit, or in Peachtree City, Brad's mom unfortunately passed away in 2018. And that event really rocked our world in a pretty significant way. And he started looking desperately for some more meaning in life. And at that time, in 2018, toward the end of 2018, was also an interesting moment in the Methodist Church. So the Methodist Church made a decision. They have one international governing entity, right, where they made this big decision to not allow anyone on the LGBTQIA plus spectrum be members of clergy, as well as some other things. And so as we were looking at going back to church and finding the right church for us, that decision cemented for us that it was not going to be the Methodist Church. And so with that, Brad started looking around. I have to say, honestly, he led the way on this, because I wasn't quite where he was. I wasn't quite ready to come back to church yet, honestly. So he was looking around and found a church in our community that was pretty much across the street from where we were living at the time, which was COS. Saw the website talking about how open the church was, how the church embraced LGBTQIA+, and just really reflected a lot of our personally held values. And so that meant a lot to us. So he went and checked out the church one Sunday and then brought us back the week after, which was Easter Sunday. And that was early 2019, and we've been there ever since. And that began a real journey for me to bring me back to my own faith. And I was very hesitant at first, and it just broke me down with the authenticity and the beautiful way God spoke through so many different things. We started in the traditional service, actually, and that was what Brad had been used to. I grew up with more contemporary music, with the dancing in the aisles and things like that. You don't usually do that during hymns. You should try a weird thing. That would be
hilarious. The sanctuary, when the new sanctuary reopens, you should just dance down the aisles. And
I think I might be tackled.
Prisoning the sanctuary. So, ain't nobody in traditional service going to tackle you. They're going to be in those comfy chairs and just be like...
But anyway, so we went to that service and we're singing the hymns and really enjoying it. And then COVID happened, and we had joined the choir, and then COVID happened, and there was a request for a lot of special music to be recorded, like individually, to send out through email to people or to post on social media to keep the congregation engaged. And so Brad and I sang a song together, and once we did that, then the current, at that time, head of contemporary worship saw us singing and was like, oh, these people can sing too. So brought me into singing in the contemporary service about once a month, and that kind of began, the next chapter of our faith journey and how we participated in music and how we started worshiping differently ourselves, and it brought me back to a lot of my roots. And you can probably see the way I connect to the Holy Spirit might feel, Sometimes I feel like it might feel a little bit different for the Lutheran Church, but it's who I am. And
How long were you guys going there before Brad started working at the church?
I think he started working at the church in, I want to say it was 2021, maybe.
So a couple years.
It's a couple years. Yeah, a couple years. Yeah, I lost my job, which I've talked about on the podcast before. I was laid off from my job in 2019. And after being out of work for almost a year, we decided to move in with my parents in Omaha for a couple of months. Luckily, it was only a couple of months. And then I was reemployed, but knew that our time at COS was not over. And honestly, that's why we came back. We came back here after a couple months and came back to the church and just felt like this was a place that we needed to be. And I'm so happy with that decision.
And now you're not allowed to leave.
Ashley has banned us leaving the church. We were joking about I was joking about going to England for Charlie's middle school, and Ashley was like, but you can't. And I was like, oh. I forgot we were married.
I did
talk about being in the envelope. Well, the envelope sealed.
Exactly. Ashley's like, you can go, but I'm coming too with my 4 children. And we're like, you know what? We're good.
Well, I did want to say the Methodist Church now has reversed that decision and now is very open to the rainbow being a part of clergy, which I think is a wonderful, wonderful thing for the Methodist Church. And I hope that the Methodist Church will grow and thrive under that new decision. We have moved on. We're not going back to the Methodist Church at this point. I'm very happy being a Lutheran. But I wish the Methodist Church all the best and a happy road ahead.
Add them back to our VBS roster.
And now Ashley.
Okay, so I grew up at Christ Our Shepherd. Was like from baptism to confirmation, all of that, all through high school. Actually, my parents stopped going for some reason during high school, and I drove myself still to Christ Our Shepherd in high school because I'm just a weirdo. But I will say Christ Our Shepherd back then is very different from what it is now, and I'll get to that in the next part of the story. But as I moved for college and things, I think I pretty much picked churches due to proximity and their choir. So most of the churches I could walk to, and I liked their choirs. So when I went to Macon, I went to First Baptist there and sang in their choir and walked to the church. And then in Lubbock, Texas, for graduate school, I went to an Episcopal church and sang in their choir and could walk there as well. And then when I moved back to Atlanta, I went to a Methodist church, St. Paul United Methodist in Grant Park. And I was at that church for about 13 years and had a wonderful experience there. The people there were very friendly. They were open-minded about all the letters. All the letters.
You two were your daughters in that exact moment. It was fantastic. It's great.
And I was super involved in that church. You know, I helped with VBS, and I did like the children's sermon and just volunteered all over the place and just really loved that church. So when we moved at the beginning of the pandemic, came back to my hometown. Since it was COVID, I did attend St. Paul online for as long as I could. And then as we were going back into society, I was like, okay, I've got to find a church down here. And started attending online services to different churches. And I did not go to Christ Our Shepherd at first because it was different. When I was younger, it was not as friendly. Like I was there for almost my entire life, and there's lots of people at Christ Our Shepherd they don't know me at all, or know that I even attended, even though I was there for like 18 years,
Wow.
And I was like, part of that's on me. Like I was painfully shy. So like I didn't reach out, but also no one reached out to me either. So, so it took me a while to circle back to Christ Our Shepherd. That I went to maybe like 5 or 6 online services and some in person. And then James started playing in the praise band. Mm-hmm. And he was asking me just over and over again. He's like, you gotta come back and see this service. It's really fun. And so I came to visit one time for the contemporary service, and I was like, oh yeah, this is great. that people were so friendly and the music was great, and it was great being there with James and my mom, and yeah. And then, of course, then that was also like the very rocky part of my life, and I was looking for something. I was looking for a place that I could find connections with, because at the time, almost all of my connections had been severed, which was very, very difficult for me. Like I really valued connections with people, and the fact that so many things out of my life were just completely cut off. So I was looking for more connections and new connections, and I found like just the absolutely best ones at Christ Our Shepherd, like real like friendships and real caring and love. So.
And you moved to where you can now walk to church too.
And it's proximity. I can walk, and the music's great.
Look how that worked out.
Right.
Yeah, I think I didn't talk a lot about it, but community was such a big part of my decision too. This is Kendra again. And I think we were so lovingly embraced by so many people at this church, whether it was on the traditional side or once we moved over to the contemporary side. Different people, I would say, in both, because, there tend to be different crowds on the two sides of our church, but so well embraced and loved by so many people, and just brought right in, enveloped, right?
I will say too, I really do love the traditions of the Lutheran Church, of like doing communion every week, and just like
It's comforting.
the meaning behind the rituals and the tradition is really important to me.
People have asked me, do you like all that liturgy that they do in the Lutheran Church? And I'm like, I really do. When the pastor says, the peace of the Lord be with you, and the whole congregation all together says, and also with you, it just fills that voice, just fills the whole room. And it's very, it's really profound, I think. I
find it very comforting. Yeah. Like, there's, so there's a little boy that he's going to get so mad that I said that. There's a young man that attends with Charlotte and I sometimes. Call him a little boy, he's going to get very upset with me. There's a young man, Charlie's best friend, attends church with us sometimes, and he is on the spectrum, and it's things that he finds comfort. He loves church. And when they went to Europe, they took him to all these, big old churches and everything, and he was just fascinated by them. But he really likes routine, and he really likes knowing what's going to happen. So him coming to our church, where he's handed, for traditional service, is handed a pamphlet and he knows exactly what's coming up, exactly what to expect. He can mark his hymnal for all the hymns, even though they're printed in there, and I keep telling him that they're printed in there. He can mark it out. It's very comforting to him. And I think for a lot of people, it's just knowing that, especially when I have a super chaotic week, there is something that is just so stress relieving about going and just knowing that, okay, I know that I can at least expect this, and I can expect this, and I'm going to get communion, and I'm going to be blessed, and I don't have to think about anything while I'm there. I can just be at peace. I can just sit there peacefully and connect with people I know who love me, and my pastor's going to ask me how I'm doing, and I'm going to engage in these rituals with all these other people, and it's going to be so comforting, and I'm going to leave with my cup a bit fuller than when I got there, or a lot fuller when I got there, and it's very comforting to me.
That is one of the things that attracted me to this church. The very first day I was there, I thought, boy, somebody has spent some time and the sermon topic for the day. I'm like, how interesting.
They are very similar.
I think it's very similar. There's I can't remember
Wesley and Luther.
It's either a 2-year or 3-year plan where they have everything laid out for that period of time, and then I'm sure there's another one that's coming out soon, because I think this was maybe the last. Anyway, doesn't matter. But it's really helpful for Brad and I when we're planning music, not having to wait for the sermon to be ready to plan that, because so often, these pastors, they're doing a sermon every week, and the sermon isn't ready sometimes until days before the sermon, right?
Well, and not every pastor follows the lectionary in every church. In our church, he does, but not every church.
There are some exceptions,
and
but
then some people use that in their small group, and if they do that in the small group and then in the sermon, well, that's a nice fit.
Absolutely. I love to be able to. He even asked us to start doing spoken transitions from the sermon into our music, and we don't always know what the content of the sermon is going to be, so those are often improvised, which they,
Right.
from week to week, seem more so sometimes than others. But I think it's been really helpful to have that lectionary, to have that plan in place, so that we do know the general message that we've got to work with, and can choose music that will really help honor the word that the pastor is preaching about in the sermon. So that is super helpful. So Stephen J. Cole, he's a former pastor from Flagstaff. He wrote on Bible.org that the Bible requires 10 things of a good church.
Oh my gosh, keep going up.
I know, right? I think that there might be a little bit of debate on this. So let's get into it and talk about it. So the first thing is, a good church is one that treasures and teaches God's word of truth accurately and practically to equip the saints for the work of service. What do we think about that?
I mean, what's accurate?
Yeah,
Like,
that's what I was
everybody
gonna
has
say.
a different
Well,
opinion
I
of
think
what
every
accurate
church
is.
probably interprets that
Yeah.
differently. So
I mean, that's why we
you'd
have
have to
8
find one.
million different denominations of Christianity.
Right?
And even people within a church
Yeah.
interpret it differently.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. Even
Just gonna
people
drop this. You
within a
look at
small
it as-
group interpret that differently. So the second is where the gospel is proclaimed without compromise. I think, again, we probably get into that issue of how the gospel is interpreted.
I think it's proclaimed. I think
It is absolutely proclaimed.
It's definitely. I think pretty much every church proclaims the gospel.
I would agree with that. So our third is that emphasizes loving God and one another and worshiping God in spirit and in truth.
I agree with it.
Yeah,
That's
That's
good.
solid. So 4, that emphasizes making obedient disciples who live by God's grace and the power of the Spirit apart from legalism.
What does that mean?
That's a lot.
So legalism,
like what?
like the,
I was there in the beginning.
Old Testament thinking, like
Okay.
life is a series of laws instead of living by God's grace and knowing that we're covered in His grace and His mercy and that our sins are forgiven.
I feel like a lot more modern church does that a lot more than. I think if you go to some of these more old school conservative churches, there probably is a lot more legalese.
Well, I think
involved,
that can
but-
be a stumbling block for some people if it's not, if legalism is the cornerstone of the church, that's a stumbling block for some people.
It's almost an
Yeah.
idol.
But it's a comfort for some people.
I have a problem with the verbiage of obedient servant.
Okay.
We talked a little bit about this the other day, that sometimes I feel like Christianity can be interpreted in a way that can also lead people into abusive situations. That I feel like obedient, submissive. Some of that needs to be dissected, I think.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Watching that documentary series I was telling you guys about, Shiny Happy People, on Amazon Prime. I'm promoting it now. It's about the IBLP religious organization. They had basically some people got together talking about some activities the pastors were doing that they did not feel comfortable with. And so a new rule came down from the leadership of the church that said gossip is no longer allowed in any way, shape, or form, which basically was a construct to not allow people to get together and assimilate with issues they had with leadership. And so I think that really can open the door to, that obedience can open the door to some church abuse in some ways if it's not, if there's not
in your
good
own
checks and
ideology
balances
and
system in
belief
place.
too. It's like that's like in your core values and beliefs that I need to be obedient, I need to be submissive, then that can lead people to really bad situations.
Well, and to be a part of a church, you don't have to be obedient to be a part of a church, right? Anybody can walk in from off the street and be a part of a church, can't they?
Yeah.
They should be able to, right?
Yeah, that
Anybody
should
can be a Christian.
I think it's then the job of the church. So if you in your heart of hearts are thinking, well, I have to be obedient, I have to be submissive, then it is kind of the job of the church and the leadership of the church to make sure that it's clear that your obedience and submission is to God. It's not to man. It's not to
Good
the
point.
church
Yes.
as a whole, that it's only to God that you're supposed to be feeling that too. And I think that's where that abuse of language can come into. And it's, it's a way you look at the Bible, and it drives me insane when I look at these verses that we now hold so dear to our heart, of like everyone being equal and everyone being loved, and to love everyone, and to know that for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years that people were taking that same language and using it to oppress other people. And I'm like, how are you reading the same thing? How are you reading that and saying that slavery is okay, or domestic abuse is okay, conquering other countries is okay in the name of Jesus Christ? That is not what he stood for. So it's one of these things where if you're walking into a church and you're feeling that the only people that are being celebrated in that church are the people who are in power, then that is not a safe place.
Well, and I would even say additionally, one of the things that held me back from coming back to church is feeling like God was not for me, because I did not feel like I was obedient yet, that I was prepared for God, if that makes sense. And I felt like I needed to be someone or something different than who I was to be able to walk back into a church and be a Christian again.
Yeah, I mean that's why I stress grace so much, and I appreciate churches that stress grace so much, is that you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to follow all the rules all the time in order to be a good person. We said it yesterday, there are times to turn tables and there's time to turn the other cheek. So knowing that, especially as someone who's very independent and very strong-willed, to turn around and then try to tell me that I have to be obedient and submissive, that was a really hard thing for me to say. But then someone explained it to me, being like, you're not being obedient to your pastor. You're not being submissive to the deacon of your church. You're being to the God who literally had himself nailed onto a cross for you. Like, you want to talk about obedience. You want to talk about sacrifice. Oh, yeah. This man gave up his life for you. The least you can do is watch your tongue and, submit to him when he's telling you, hey, I have a better plan for you. Stop doing what you're doing. You're messing it up.
Or the least
Knock
you
it
can
off.
do is try to be better.
Yeah.
Right? Just try to be better.
I don't feel like Jesus is being like, look, I've created this nice smooth path for you. Here you go. No, God, there's always stumbling blocks. There's always rough patches, and God's just going, I'm going to walk with you on this, but you have to be on the path with me in order to do it. You have to keep moving on this path with me. Like, if you just decided to be a petulant child and sit there and fold your arms and have a tantrum and be like, no, I'm not moving, and I have to drag you down the path instead, you're not being obedient.
Yeah. So I think we all agree that God and church are for you to meet you wherever you're at.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that behooves us to meet each other wherever you're at. And
Yeah.
sometimes that's a struggle.
Yeah.
And that's where we get into trouble, making people think that the standard is higher than they can meet.
Yeah.
But, if you can hold the hand of the adulterer walking back into the church and sit beside him in church when you're mad as heck at him.
The passing of the peace, I think, is an interesting moment in our church for that factor. There was even this last week, someone who I don't want to get into details, but there's been a little bit of friction in our relationship, and they turned to me, made eye contact, and made a point to say, "Peace of the Lord be with you," and that meant a lot. There was a real connection there, and I think that's a one footstep in the right direction, right?
Yeah. So all you can do, little baby steps, as long as you're going forward.
Okay, so our fifth is a good church is one where loving fellowship among the saints is edifying and healthy.
I love that we're being called saints.
I vote yes on that one.
Yeah, healthy is good. Edifying is good. Healthy can be interpreted maybe in different ways, but I think generally.
Yeah, I think your definition of healthy and my definition of healthy very different.
I don't know about that.
Man who just did 2 exercise classes this morning,
I'm so tired.
and I a cookie.
Okay, 6. Where the ordinances of baptism and communion are practiced regularly and biblically.
Ooh.
That makes me go, oh,
Yeah, 'cause I think that's definitely
That sounds like some legalism.
that's
Yeah.
legalism right there. I think there's sacraments that are definitely should be respected and celebrated and practiced and everything. But I've gone to churches where you have communion every Sunday, and I've gone to churches where you have communion once a year.
Yeah.
And you know what? They were both great places. So I think it's one of these things where it's just like, if that's where your line is, that's where your line is. But if it's not something that's important to you, then I don't think it's necessarily. We talked about it in baptism. There's some churches that baptize when they're babies, and some churches that wait till you're an adult to baptize, or you're older to baptize. I think
I do think
whatever you're comfortable
a good
with.
church should be practicing baptism.
Yeah.
I will agree with that. Okay, so the next one. What are we on? 7. Where prayer undergirds everything.
Undergirds. Yeah. What does that word mean? What does undergird mean?
Is the foundation of everything.
Oh.
It supports everything.
Prayer is? I would think that the word would be what undergirds everything, not necessarily prayer.
I don't know, I kind of agree with it because I think it's like your relationship with God.
Yes.
That's the most important part, is your relationship with God.
Yeah, it's still prayer awkward, so it's
I think prayer is where we give out the whatever's going on in our heart, but it's also where we receive. If we're listening, if we have open ears and open eyes, that communication with God, that's kind of where we get and give messages to each other. And to your point, Ashley, that's the foundation of a relationship, isn't it? That let's talk about this together, kind of thing,
I do think prayer is very important foundationally, and that is one thing I would say in the liturgical church. Prayer looks a little bit different than it did in the church I grew up in. So prayer was all emotion in the church that I grew up in, whereas in the liturgical church, it's very much about the scripture and about the liturgy, and so that for me has been. I don't even want to say challenging, but just a little different.
It has been for me, because I'm like, well, let's pray for the person that is on all of our hearts. Why don't we name him by name? Or why don't, it's not quite as personal. It's like we pray for the world and for the healing of the environment and for, I'm like, okay, but what about what's really going on in our hearts right this minute, so...
And I loved how one day during our small group, we always do prayer requests. Everyone goes around and says something. And one day you said, if there's something on your heart, go ahead and say it, because this gives us a view into your life as well. And I loved that. Sometimes you feel like this prayer request that it's like a gossip session, but framing it in this way of like, we care about you. We want to know what's going on in your life. So let's pray about it.
Yeah.
I love that.
I love that too.
I think it's also like prayer is an opportunity coming from more emotional side to a more liturgical side. I think it also gives you an opportunity to combine the two, and it gives you more access to prayer. I think learning how to combine scripture with emotional prayer, I think just deepens. The Bible is the word was His word to us. So being able to include His word into prayers to Him is one of those cycle.
I totally agree with you. I think
Yeah.
that has been a game changer for my own prayer life and how I'm able to lead my family spiritually in a lot of ways too. Is if you abide in Him, He abides in you, and I think the Word is a big part of that, and putting the Word in your prayers, which just really wasn't where it came from before. So that's been a big game changer for my prayer life.
Yeah, but I told my 8th graders, because my 8th graders, when we were talking about teaching them the Bible and praying and everything like that, they were like, oh, I need a Bible verse for everything. And I was like, you don't need a Bible verse for everything. You can just talk to Him. I was like, I don't know nearly enough Bible verses for every emotion that I'm feeling on a daily basis. I said, there are just going to be times where you're just going to have to break down and be like, I don't know what you say about this, Lord, but like, I'm feeling this right now, and I need your help with this, or I'm grateful for this, or I'm going through this, and He'll lead you to where you need to go. So,
Agreed. Okay, so our next, we're on 8, that emphasizes reaching the lost, both locally and globally.
I agree with that.
I agree with that.
Yep.
100%. A lot of what we were just talking about a moment ago. So 9, whose leaders are mature, godly men of integrity.
Or women.
Agreed. I'm wearing my Listen to Women Preach shirt today.
Well, yeah, I hope the leaders are of integrity everywhere, not just in the church.
I will say the leaders are also people.
Yeah.
They're human, they're flesh, and they, are not going to be perfect.
Yeah.
So I think this can be tricky.
It can, and it behooves us not to put anybody on a pedestal, because they have cracks. Pedestals have cracks in them.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
humans are fallible. But leaders that have integrity and strive to be better and maybe have an open ear and open door policy to
That's the
hear
goal.
feedback,
That
right?
is the goal. That is the
And are open when they do make mistakes.
Right.
Admit to them and strive to, to fix their mistakes and to admit when they're wrong. I mean, that's a strength that's a person's character, strength of person's character anyway. But you definitely want leaders to turn around that you're supposed to be taking moral and ethical guidance from I think that's what rocks with church scandals so much. I think that's what rocks the foundation so much, is that you're looking to this person for ethical and moral guidance, and when then you find out that person not only messed up, but they also lied about it and try to cover it up. I think that's worse than the actual beginning scandal. Like, if someone was to screw up and turn around and say, look, I screwed up, I admit it, I'm going to take some time, I'm going to step away so that I can work on myself, I have way more respect for that than someone who has just covered, try to sweep it under the rug and make it out like it's not no big deal.
So our 10th, this one's a little challenging, ladies, that deals lovingly and biblically with sinning members.
No, well, can't stone them. That's not.
Now, this is what didn't we just talk about this too? Paul.
Beanbags.
Yeah, we did.
I
Throw
can't remember-
beanbags at people.
I can't remember which book it's in, but one of the books that Paul may or may not have written, as we talked about in a couple episodes ago, talks about how if there is a member of your congregation that is sinning, right, that it's important to confront them. For the whole church, I believe it says, actually, to confront them, which seems wild. Could you
Well, I
imagine?
think the scripture thing is you go to them one-on-one. That doesn't work. You take a partner and you go. If that doesn't work, then you go to the whole church body.
Oh, wow.
But maybe that was written when the church body was 15 people.
Well, the home church,
You
when it
know.
was like in someone's house, right?
Not a 500.
I think we should hold each other accountable.
Yeah.
I think that's part of being in church, and why we're there, is we're trying to be good people.
Well, our pastor talked about in his sermon last weekend, even who in your life is the person that tells you the truth.
And I think that because the bigger we get, and we're all in ministry, so when we have those relationships in love, you're not going to take that advice from somebody that you don't think cares about you.
Yeah.
So the first thing you got to have a relationship with somebody before you offer correction.
Yeah, I think it's definitely one of these things where you definitely have to toe that line. Like, if I was to find out something about someone at the church, but I don't have a close relationship with that person, but I know someone else who does, then do I go to that person and say, oh, well, I'm not close with this person, but I know you're close with this person, and this is what I heard was going on, so you need to come. It's so messy. It gets really messy really quick, and you don't want to also then go tattle to, the pastor and be like, you need to go talk to this person, and, you want to try to be adults about it, but it can get really sticky really quickly.
It's really sticky and who are you?
I'm just thinking about when I was going through what I went through, before I came back to the church and everything. I can't imagine how I would have reacted. Because, the people who were in my life, who cared about me, who I tried so hard to keep that from, when they did approach me, I was so defensive and so cruel and so, get away from me. You have no idea what's going on. I wasn't able to get help until I was ready to get help. Mm-hmm. So it's one of these things too where I'm like, well, if someone's going through that hard of a time or is really hitting rock bottom that bad, they might not be ready for me to to come up for them. So I think that's when you have to start a relationship with that person with your kind of goal in mind of, let me get to close enough to this person to where I can say something to them, to be, and without them thinking that I'm just trying to attack them.
Or to love on them and listen to them to where you understand where they're coming from and what's going on
Yeah.
and why they're behaving the way that they are.
We had an angel of a pastor who just recently retired from our church who very much embodied that idea, who
Yeah.
could easily go up to someone and just say, "How are you doing? Why don't you come in and
Yeah.
let's talk?
Let's talk.
Let's talk about what's
Yeah.
going on with you."
And you would tell her, because she looked like a little fairy tale grandmother, right?
Yeah.
It's just pure love. Pure
Just
love.
reminded you of a little fairy tale character. And you're just like, well, you're Mother Goose. Of course I'm going to tell you.
So I think the last thing that we need to talk about is just what process do we recommend anybody else should go through in looking for a church? I will just share one quick anecdote. A friend of mine on social media this last week, I shared a post. Andrea, sorry, so many tangents in my mind. Andrea, who was recently on our podcast, on our patriotism episode, we were talking about Christian nationalism as an issue that's really been rising up in a pretty ugly way in our country. And so she shared a post from the ELCA from about a year ago, and the bishop of the ELCA recently put out a video on social media about Christian nationalism and how terrible an epidemic this is becoming. And so she shared this post, which then I shared, prompted me to share it, and a woman who I used to work with in LA, who we didn't know each other as Christians in any way, shape, or form. And I don't know that she has been living a Christian life in any way, but she reached out to me and was like, "I love this." And it started a conversation where I was able to introduce the ELCA to her and how this is such a unique organization in the world of options of churches that does really reflect a lot of the values that I know I have, and I think you have some of too. So check them out. She was like, "I definitely got to check the ELCA out." So what do we think is a good list of, a good process for someone to go through to find their own
I
church?
think it depends on what your priorities are. So as a mom, my priority when I was shopping for church was a children's program that was diverse and that my daughter was going to be able to grow with and be a part of, and that was attentive and was prevalent and was a priority to the church. We had Ken from a church that had a massive children's program, and it has still one of the best children's programs I have ever seen. Their youth program is bar none. If she was to come to me in middle school and high school and say, "Hey, Mom, my friend's going here, I want to go with them to youth group," I'd be like, "Yeah, go for it. That's awesome. They have a great program." But whereas I also wanted community for me. So like my main priority was, community for her, but then I also then had to look at and be like, well, we were just at our church for 6 years and I barely had any community. So like I want community for you, a good strong children's program for you, but I also want community for me where I know that my talent and time is going to be appreciated and valued. And so that was something that I think I think it depends on what stage of life you're in.
Well, to that point, though, about wanting a strong youth and children's program, when we were looking for a church, that was on our list because we don't want to invest in a church that has no future.
Yeah.
And
That makes
we don't
sense.
want to
I
be
didn't
in
think about
even
that.
though we've got gray hair, we don't want to be in a congregation that's all gray hair.
No, that makes
Because-
perfect sense.
15 years from now, they won't be there. We won't be there.
I'm gonna help
Probably.
build a legacy.
So,
The church to build a legacy.
Yeah.
Help them build that legacy.
so, and that's important.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite things that Miriam and Fritz both say it a lot, is the sons and daughters of the church. And when they leave and they come back, like we've had multiple, members, children, that were raised in the church that have now
Ashley.
left, and Ashley, that have now left, that will come back for, special, performances, or they'll come back at Christmas. And, our pastor's always very good about saying, our daughter of the church is back. And I just love that so much. I just think it's such a sweet sentiment to have.
Yeah. I think there's probably like several different churches that people could fit into, but I would think that you would want to be someplace where you feel God, where you feel a connection with God, you feel a presence with God. you know.
Yeah, I think online is a good place to start to find a church that is putting out into the world that they reflect the values that are important to you. I think that was, at least for us, part of our journey, and I think it's perhaps, if that's important to you, would be a good place to start. But then, yeah, Ashley, I think you need to get in there in the flesh and really experience it and see if you feel God there.
And if you belong. So I think there's a place, I think there's, you could watch online and be like, oh, I love this. But then you go and you're like, I'm not going to fit in here. Or I'm going to have to work too hard to fit in here.
We went to churches where nobody spoke to us.
Yeah.
Or, so there's a message there. Maybe this isn't the fit, But it's interesting because ultimately you would love what you said, Ashley, just you want to feel the sense of God there, and that's the ultimate. But then we're down in the nitty gritty of I want one that's close. I want one that's...
and you got to walk to it, yeah.
I want one where I don't have to dress up. I want,
I need to go to be able to walk.
I like it if they have coffee in the morning. That's really nice. Our human part just looks for that stuff.
Yeah, and that's definitely where our privilege, comes in. I think we can all admit to like how much of a privilege that is for us, especially in this area of the country. Like we do have that opportunity
Throw a
to
rock
where,
and hit a church.
yeah, like we have many options. And so we are able to kind of like cherry pick and and to get the perks that, that we kind of want. Like we get the donuts in the morning. We get, we kind of get to pick these perks. But, I think for a lot of people, that are struggling to find a church, especially in an area where they might not have a lot of options, I think it's one of these things where, they're just like, well, this is the least of the worst. So this is where I'm going to go. And I hate that for them. And that's where I'm so happy that there is such a stronger online presence for churches, because I hate knowing that there are people out there that just don't have the access that we have, that we have been blessed with.
And I think also looking for, once you've been able to be inside the church, feel God, feel like you belong there, what else can you do with that church so that it's not just a place you go to on Sunday?
Yeah, what are you giving to the church instead of the church always giving to you?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely got to be a two-way street.
How do you connect in?
And I don't think that's anything in life. Like the more, whatever you put into something, that's what you're going to get out of it. So if you're just showing up on Sunday and then leaving, then you're probably not going to get that much out of it,
Yeah, and I think people find themselves at different seasons of life where it feels like maybe that's all they have to give. And so that's understandable, but knowing that the more that you pour in, the more that you'll receive.
Yeah, if you're just showing up on a Sunday morning, not trying to greet anyone, just kind of sitting in the back row, going through the motions and then leaving, and then complaining at coffee later to a friend saying, like, nobody talks to me. I don't feel connected. There's no community at this church. And I'm like, what have you done to offer? You don't have that excuse at our church, because at our church we're just like, oh, you can remotely sing? Okay, cool. We're gonna go over here.
It can also just be like,
you've worked with, you babysat one time? Okay, cool. You're gonna go work in the nursery. You're just like, okay.
But it can also just be, like showing up on Sunday, but then taking that message with you throughout the week and you living your life that way. You know what I mean?
Agreed. All right. Well, anything else you guys have to say about church shopping? No. All right.
Come shop at our church.
We've exhausted the subject.
We're on sale.
Check out the ELCA.
Big sale happening.
On that note, have a great week, and God bless you. Bye.
We need to have one of those, like,